That's a wind scoop.
Oh, what does the wind scoop do?
You can see it scoops the wind. So it's got this big tail on it here. Moves around. So here is where the mouth is. And you can see there's some holes down here. So the wind kind of comes this way. It gets blown, so it's always pointed into the wind. The wind comes down, gets forced down into the house. At the same time, you can see there's a little shelter or cover here, and then there's these holes to really get rid of all this darn strangled dogweed here. But the holes then allow the air to blow out. So inside of here, there's tubes within tubes. So what happens is when that cold air is getting blown in and is going into the house, it's pushing out. It comes out at the kind of top of the house and then falls and then gets slowly pushed out the bottom of the house because there's holes at the bottom. And that's when it comes out and gets sucked out. So there's an air exchange from the air coming in, warms up the air to the temperature because it's traveling over a pipe which has the outgoing air coming out of it. So the outgoing air and ingoing air have moments to thermally adjust.
Wow.
Any sense?
Yeah. Geordie Lishman, Laura J, here today on Paula Lishman's birthday, Geordie's mom, and you're actually right now standing on top of the underground home that has received so much attention over the years, Geordie.
Yeah, we were pioneers. It was built 30 years ago. You can see there's one of the domes there that goes to the living room. And we got a fabulous view back here. You can see all the way clear to Port Perry. And you can see the lake on both sides of the island. Well, yeah, we are for sure one of the first airships in Ontario. And it's built on the ground here. I'm on top of the house. You can see the dome back here is one of the domes for the living room. And we just talked about the wind scoop back there.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see the beautiful view because we're built on top of a hill. Even though we're underground, this place has a pretty amazing view. You can see all Port Perry. I don't know if you can see it back there somewhere. There's the kind of retaining wall. Back here, if I can get my bearings, is the modular dome. This is the very first rough one, which we'll be seeing a little later.
And that's the dome home, or that's the dome dining room, the dining dome.
Dining dome, yes. And this is the roof of the back solarium.
The back solarium.
Yeah, all of this grape pile is where the house is.
Yeah. How amazing. And you've lived in this house since not when you were born, but since
we built
you helped build it.
Yeah, me, my brother, and Aaron me, my brother, and Richard, who was my dad's apprentice, we really built all the structure for this. And then we had teams come and cover it in concrete and do a lot of the concrete work. So, yeah, that was when I was 14. That's when I really learned to weld for the first time. I mean, I was welding little bits and stuff before, but this was every day welding for hours and hours and hours. So I got pretty used to stick welding.
Yeah. So at 14, you were building an underground dome home. And what was that like for you on a social level to have such out of the box parents?
Oh, well, we lived in a farmer's community, so I was pretty outcast. But, you know, I had the drama group friends that I had. And we had, you know, our own kind of little clique. But yeah, when I was 14, like I said, the big year, because you know, I think I might have even been younger now that I think about it. I'd have to do the math on this because it was done in 91. In 90, I would have been It would have been, yeah. Maybe we started when I was 13, because it would have been like a couple years before that. So it would have been like 89. Yeah. Anyways, this is the front room here. You can see, it's got lots of.
And this is where plants are usually stored in the front window.
Yeah, so it's got a big window. That's at ground level, essentially, right? And we had a big storm last night that essentially flooded the front area because all the grass clippings and all this kind of stuff came and clogged up the drain, and it kind of flooded everything out.
Yikes.
So, but yeah, it was a bit of a thing. So we're going to come into the kitchen.
Okay. There we go. Perfect.
Quite well lived in right now.
How amazing.
Yeah. Let me see if I can switch this around. I can show you what I'm looking at.
Okay.
See myself in it all the time.
Perfect.
I don't know how to do that, so I'm just going to keep it like this. Here is.
The video is choppy, but we're seeing the refrigerator pop up.
I decided we needed a pop-up fridge because, square fridges don't really fit very well in a round house. But I'll take you into my room because we're having a bit of a birthday party for my mom today. It's her birthday. So
yeah. Happy birthday, Paula.
But, my room here is a bit of a shambles as I'm working in it. So I've got all this foam I'm cutting for the dome.
And you're building your own dome.
Yeah, this is for the modular dome. We can walk out there too. There's
your mom and dad. And here we have.
This is how the dome was built. We're gonna go for a little ride to the modular dome.
Woohoo! All right, and then this is going to become an Airbnb.
It's going to be an Airbnb. It is our prototype. It's a working prototype, but it is certainly not as the very final version is going to be. It's there's only half the mold, so we just took half of the mold and put some interior material and then spray foamed on the outside. So the outside has still a really rough exterior because it's just rough spray foam. But the eventual version, there will be two halves to the mold, and so the whole thing will be nice and smooth. We also only built one mold, really, which is not the entire dome. I added a bathroom. And a kitchen and a front hallway. That's not made in the old style, which the whole thing will be eventually. The idea behind this is that these parts are small enough that you could set the thing up and take it down in a day. And that building this one part thing with all the plumbing and the wiring, all of it connected in the walls, and you just plug them together, makes it one of the cheapest ways you can possibly build something that's going to last hundreds of years. The idea, because we're using materials which are really durable. So here we are. Here's the little dome home.
Way to go.
We've got, it's still a construction site. We're just gluing it and still caulking it. And it rained last night with the skylight off, so I'm not exactly sure how that fared. But you can see, here's our front door. This is the front hall, as I mentioned. And it is a big section. Here is the dome bits. And you can see here there's a seam. And I'm making a foam seam cover. That's what I was making in my room there. That's what all that foam on the floor was. This is the bathroom. Little area. It's the really only ground window we have in here. You can see it's all just foam. This whole thing was just made out of foam, essentially, with the coating on it. So I basically just made a, very similar to my folks, a wire mesh. You can kind of see the mesh still a little bit. If you can see the cross grid. But after I built the mesh, I covered it in a landscaping fabric and then sprayed foam right onto it. And yeah, it worked pretty good. But this is not how the end version is supposed to be. So yeah, we're going a little tour here. Like I said, it's a construction zone.
Woohoo.
It doesn't have floors in it because another 4 inches foam on the floor. So that is going to be super solid.
We couldn't
Like
hear
I said,
that.
these are the molded parts. And yeah, so this is our front hall, and here's the main room where you have a bedroom and our little table. This is going to be the kitchenette. And of course, this is the bathroom you saw from the outside too.
Wow. So cool. And that's going to be a shower.
This is the shower, and the toilet goes over there, and the sink and the water. And it's got on-demand water heating, which we've been talking about using as the actual heating for the floors as well. But we'll see. We're also putting in a small electric separator for heat pump, air-cooled heat pumps. They're amazing.
And what would that do?
Well, eventually the idea is that we're going to, I don't know if you can see, probably not, unless I take you over here somewhere. But yeah, the air source heat pumps are just really efficient way of deriving heat because they don't produce the heat. They actually just move heat from one place to another. So I don't know if you can see, but there is a set of little holes that are for going, for putting a staircase into the top of this place. We're going to put a little like umbrella, a little lounge on the top, and then maybe have a web up there too. So there can be like a little web walk through the forest here.
Oh, wow. That'll be cool.
Webs lately. But yeah, it's going to be super fun. Another Airbnb on Purple Hill, and an opportunity because the real kind of eventual idea here is that we make a bunch of molds to create houses, and we can pop out a house a day or faster, possibly, depending on how many molds we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the idea is to build it with something really durable and foam. There's all kinds of foam now. This is polyurethane foam, but you can create soya foam and corn foam. You'll need the isocyanate. It's the same chemical that will be used, but there's all kinds of different kind of resins that you can create from different plant-based things. And they last a really long time so long as they're not exposed to UV. So it would be the idea to put a really durable, kind of like a box liner shell around them, because the foam itself is actually very structural and strong, but it's not very strong. Like you could kind of smash it apart. Like if I didn't have like a really good coating of paint on it, it would be easy to kind of like rip pieces off. But even a really thick coating of paint actually helps the whole thing stay together. I've seen a pretty interesting demonstration once too, where I don't know if you know those really light foam coolers that you get at the store. Well, I don't know if you ever tried to use one to stand up and to get a change a light bulb with, but they'll just crunch and fall apart. But if you spray it with box liner, which basically allows it to not crumble apart, but it still has its compressive forces, then you can jump up and down on the thing and drive a truck over it and it's holds together. So this is a really interesting thing. Now they're super, super light, right? So when we build them, we build it on the scaffolding, unless you have perfectly flat ground. But if we build it on the scaffolding, then the scaffolding gets all these kind of dog screws that get screwed into the ground and attach it so that the thing's anchored to the ground really well. And then the shape, if you have like a larger curve on the top and a smaller curve on the bottom, which is how I have the eventual ones designed, then you get a really interesting airflow. It creates a little vacuum underneath and sticks the thing to the ground like a wing that's flying down. So that's kind of really good for crazy storms, because I know if you go to like a hurricane zone or tornado zone, you'll see round structures survive because air is allowed to flow around. So, yeah, a lighter footprint on the earth is kind of what we're going for at this point, where these things, they just have these pads you put down and the legs kind of self-adjust. And the pieces are light enough that a crew can show up of 3 and set your house up in a matter of hours. And you can move in.
Wow.
And if the, legislation of the area say, well, we don't want that there, then you can take it down. As soon as they leave, they can put it back up. I
Great.
mean, this is the thing, is that modular or the movable structures are usually allowed in places because you can move them. And I think the kind of the thing is that you have to move them within a day, usually. If you can move it within a day, you can have it there as a tiny home.
Okay. So looking at getting this happening on a larger scale, and you've got the model that serves as a template for what's possible, but as with your Conestogas you've made at your property in Ajax, you are also able to modify the pattern so that you can add rooms, you can add sections, you can do more with
Yeah,
it.
I don't call these tiny homes, I call them modular homes, because they could be as many square feet as you want. I have build outs for, like, if we are selling to, we were talking about a possible kind of market is these disaster relief pop-up hospitals, because we can make them so they're sealable and they're really well insulated, and we can put them up quickly. You can make a really well developed, and they've got basically the end version, not these ones. The end version will have a ducting system which is built into the panels, as well as electrical systems, so they have a great opportunity to run all kinds of different tubes and hoses and electrical and things through all the stuff. And yeah, you could pop up a little hospital in real short order, just outside of a disaster area, or man-made or natural, of course.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, a real solution for the times we're in.
Yeah, we definitely, and you know what, we may be coming up on more times. I mean, I know that we are getting blamed for global warming, but I think it's a real thing. I'm just not sure whether we actually deserve the blame or not. But the Earth goes through change all the time, right? But either way, this change is something that we have to accommodate for, and we haven't really built our cities to consider what the long-term changes that the Earth might be going through. So eventually, we may have flooding on the coastlines, which would be devastating, or maybe we have retreating coastlines, and who knows? Either way, we're bound for change. So let's be prepared and have structures that we can implement quickly, move.
Yeah,
Makes sense for the long run. Hmm.
absolutely. And earlier you were talking about the section of aerodynamics and the dome home being able to stick down because of like wind under a wing you had referenced. That comes from your piloting experience as well, because that's not necessarily second-hand information. It's very much lived experience in terms of your understanding of aerodynamics from a scientific perspective, but also you were directly involved with the Operation Migration project.
That
And
was the other thing we were going to talk about, is the
yeah,
migration.
yes.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I got my hang glider pilot license when I was 14 from Michael Robertson. But when I did the movie, I got my ultralight pilot's license, and enjoyed flying around for quite a while. I have a plane now since my father passed away. He left me his plane, but it's in disrepair. So I haven't been flying for probably many years now, but I'd really love to get back in the air. But I did, I think, 3 migrations with that. And I got to lead the birds a few times on little legs. And it was definitely a highlight of my life to have those experiences. Um, Definitely learning about flying and flying around and getting to see, basically I flew out of here, or I flew out of what's it called again, the sod farm, because we had a sod farm rented for when we did the movie to kind of do a lot of different sections of geese, because we had a whole bunch of different. I basically did all the goose wrangling for the movie. That's my official title in the credits, is I'm the goose wrangler. But
Nice.
yeah, and we had a sod farm that was like a square mile of perfect lawn, and that's what we'd fly on, right? So you could take off and land and take off and land, take off and land, and the geese would fly around. And we did several different lots of geese, because further north you go, the later the geese hatch. And so they wanted shooting, be able to shoot young goose, middle-aged goose, and old goose. And so this is how we accomplished that, by having different kind of clutches of eggs taken from different, I guess, latitudes. Um, and like I said, we would fly little hops with them over and over and over again. But the fascinating thing for me was being able just to go and do like little flights around, and you start to like learn the land from the sky, and you like get to see what's in everybody's backyard, and you get to look into the lake and see all the fish and know the actual role of the terrain. Now, the terrain here seems really hilly when I'm just driving around and walking, but as soon as you get, a couple hundred feet in the air, it looks really flat. Um, and that's kind of Ontario for you. But yeah, no, aerodynamics. And the other thing was interesting is clouds. Like my one of my favorite days of flying ever was going into the clouds, and you're not allowed to fly into clouds under VFR flight rules, which is visual flight rules, because we don't fly by instrument. We have instruments, but we're not flying by instruments. You basically fly by sight. So you're not allowed to ever not see the ground, which I was generally capable of doing. But this one time I kind of got a little closed in, and it was because I went into this kind of, there was a bank of clouds, and I went up on top of it, and I kind of sorted the ridge, and then on this big bank of clouds, there was all of a sudden this huge hole. It was like a giant cave, like gigantic cave with other little clouds floating around inside of it. So I decided that I just peeked my head in the door, and I just kind of flew in. I could still see outdoor and see land, so I was technically in. But inside of there was a giant room that had this crazy dance with all these clouds whipping around inside. Like there's a whole lot going on with clouds that we have no idea. It's almost like there's a gaseous form of land and people and entities that are all dancing around up there, changing the set minute to minute, creating these huge worlds. So that was pretty cool. But on migration itself, there was a lot of experiences that were, you know, made me kind of had to question a lot of things. So we worked with a lot of biologists, and I kind of thought that they would probably have all this, under wraps. But when I started talking to them about the details of the psychology of the animals, they didn't really have much, like a huge amount of information. Like imprinting, they told me that they had imprinting completely figured out, and that Conrad Lorenz wrote the book on it, and he kind of knew everything about it. So then I started to ask them about what the different size frequencies meant in the imprinting process, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Okay, so like these geese, they imprint themselves onto the first thing that they see moving, but it's not something smaller than them, because they wouldn't be imprinting themselves onto ants or onto like little beetles running along. This would be more like something they'd peck at. So there's obviously a certain size that you have to be to imprint on. So then if something's larger than the animal, it will imprint with an imprinting that is a mother child or mother father. It's like parental imprinting is what I would call it. Then there's basically, if it's the same size as them, they have like a sibling imprinting. Now the problem I found was if you had too many young duckling or goslings in a flock, they would stop listening to you, and they would basically follow themselves around because they gained enough mass to imprint onto their own whole thing. Our imprinting methods were very audio. First of all, they know a lot of this stuff. That the sound of the mother and of the outside world is really something that they first become accustomed to. So while they're in the egg developing, we play them the sound of the airplane and of our voices. And when they come out, they're very tuned to us and to the airplane. The strange thing is that you want to tune the airplane. Like if you're going to do a tune up on the airplane, get it all ready for the whole summer, then record it. Because our experiences were even just, not having the engine quite tuned, recording that, playing that to them, and then tuning the engine differently. And as soon as they hear the engine, they're more afraid of it because it's just slightly different. I can't tell the difference, but they could. But when we, had the engine set, recorded that, and then when they actually heard the engine, they like initially when we first tried this, we tried to imprint them onto like a series of different things. They popped out of the egg, and then we had them imprint onto us, and then we had them follow around on a motorcycle, and then try to follow around the plane, and it was pretty disastrous, and it didn't really work. Next year, we tuned into this idea of playing the sounds that they're going to hear to them in the egg, but we did the whole having the engine not tuned in the right way before we actually recorded it, and so it kind of didn't work as well. Next year, tuned right into it, no pun intended, and they came out, and as soon as they heard the engine, they went right for the plane. There was all these kind of cues that occurred beforehand, but like I said, if we had too many in a flock, they would start to kind of rebel and start, because the thing is that, there was a few years where I got to spend basically most of the time with them so that they were fully imprinted onto me or onto the plane or onto this. But a lot of the time, since we were doing rotational flocks, you have to spend time with one and then spend time with another and spend time with another. So if they're spending time with themselves quite a bit, then they re-imprint onto themselves if the flock is too big. I don't know if this make any sense. But yeah, getting that whole kind of figuring out how to make sure they were getting all the things they needed to feel like they were with their rightful parent was a process. And once we had that locked down and figured out, then migrating them was, the next step. And then, of course, that entails flying with them for distances. Now, this is the thing, is that it took us these little hops. We first went over the lake, and then we went another 40 miles, 50 miles a day. Sometimes we get a bit more, sometimes a little less. But it took like 3 weeks, sometimes longer, to get down to where we were going, which is South Carolina. And it was an amazing trip down there. There's so many different things, going over the mountains, seeing like, a lot of people believe they have this innate kind of inner map that allows them to know everything. And I don't doubt that to be true, but when you get up into the sky and you're that high and you can see that far, you can kind of like feel what they feel, I think. Which is, you can kind of get a layout of where the mountain ranges are and where the biggest rivers are and which way the coast is. Once you're high enough, you can kind of see that whole layout, right? But it's also just amazing thing to be flying low level, which is what we did most of the time. And that's not actually how they generally migrate. They generally go up really high and migrate. We basically would do little hops. Now, sometimes I would fly up and check things out, but these little hops got us all the way down there. And it was always a crazy thing when we were doing it, because you'd look down and everybody would be pulling over underneath you to get out and look and take pictures. And then you see these kind of just differences between, flying over little kind of rundown shacks, and then all of a sudden mansions, and then sprawl, and then just complete wildlife. It was very interesting to see all these different things that we've been doing here. But yeah, once we got them all the way down there, which, like I said, would take 3 weeks, if not longer, the next year when they would come back, they'd come back on their own, and they would come back overnight. So they would report them, oh, they left, they're gone. We woke up this morning and they're gone. By the end of the day, that day, they would be in the front lawn. So like all of our clumsy trying to teach them this migration route, jumping from this little place to this little place, not at all the way they would have done it, right? They would have probably wait till the wind is going the right direction for them. Then they somehow know all that. Then they would fly up and jump into the jet stream and fly and land, come down just where they want to be in one day, right? Like totally different than the way we were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Once when we were down there, I had a crazy experience too with all these other little migrators. I don't know if I think I told you about that before, but um, it was like a first migration, landed at Cat Island, had this great experience, being received there by all the people and all the geese, and it was like, very elating. And then me and Dad decided to go up for kind of last flight before we pack up the planes and ship them home, and just have a look at this amazing wildlife preserve we landed on. So we got up, we took off, and we were flying around, and it was so beautiful, and see the alligators and the water. And then I look over at Dad, and he's got these silver streaks coming off. Like when he's flying through the air, there's just these silver lines coming off of him. I'm like, I, I think that you've got silver streaks coming off of you. I tell him on the radio. He's like, I was like, yeah, yeah, no, what you do too. And I'm like, okay, I'm not just hallucinating. And and then he comes back and goes, I got spiders all over my plane. And I'm like, what? And then I look close, and I'm on all of my wings and everything. There's tiny little spiders running everywhere. And then I start really looking, because what's happening is at the end of the day, the air rises, like the heat off after the sun's kind of gone down and the land's been heated up during the day. There's all this hot air that just rises gently. And that's when the spiders migrate. And they just let out this long kind of line of web, and it just gets pulled by the air, and they just grab onto it at the end of it, and they go up. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of them doing this, and they all kind of weave together in this giant nebula. And I think we flew through part of the nebula, or just catching the babies, but I eventually saw one of these nebulas clearly and could see it glinting in the sun. But oh my god. So I was flying around this giant, huge web nebula, and all these spiders are running around on it, and they're all, there's all of these insects that are getting sucked into this net, and they're all running around catching them and having this feast. Quite an amazing little sky city they built for that short period of time. And of course, I've seen one of the migrations. I remember we went to this town, and there was a newspaper, and it showed this web that appeared on a graveyard all of a sudden overnight. And it was layers and layers and layers of web, and a huge giant thing that covered the entire graveyard. And they couldn't figure out how it happened. And I didn't know either until I saw that nebula, and I figured that's what's happened, is that one of these giant nebula web cities that got sucked into a higher place flew around for long enough, built big enough, and then plopped down on a graveyard and then spooked the town out, thinking that there was some kind of giant arachnid poltergeist or something.
Yeah. Well, the superstition myth of the webs in the cemetery is definitely on par together.
No doubt. Yeah, definitely a Halloween theme.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of different migrators out there, I guess, is reality. Then of course, then we got into the crane project, right? So the crane project was really interesting, because the cranes are such completely different animals to the geese. The geese, you can put them all together, very resilient. They eat nothing but grass, so it's very easy to kind of feed them if you have a lawn. And very happy spirits, very, very, very sociable. But the cranes are very, very different. So with the cranes, first of all, the one rule that we had was that you're not allowed to really expose your human form, because they become sexually bonded to their parents, or they have essentially they're looking for a mate like their parents. So they have like a sexual bond that occurs with the parents, so that when they go to mate, they'll look for similar traits to their parents. So if they know you've been raising them as a person, then they don't often mate with other cranes, and they'll want to be around people. So yeah, you have to wear a smock that covers your form and have a puppet. And, you basically try to mimic the parent as much as possible. Now, geese have like clutches of 6 to 8, sometimes up to 12. 12 is pretty big. Usually you don't get them all surviving at that point, but after 12, they start to become too many and they start to have their own kind of like I said, consciousness. But these, you call it, these whooping cranes, actually it was sandhill cranes that we first started with because the hoopers are endangered. The sandhill cranes that I work with the most, they, would, if there was two of them in a nest, often one would kill the other for survival purposes, that they want more attention from the parents, more food or whatever, right? So you have to have each one of them their own little place and give them each their own attention. And we had one die from jumping in the nest and hitting its head. We had another die from touching the electric fence. They're like so much more fragile than geese, so much more difficult to rear and migrate with, so much bigger. And then when they got to a certain age, you could kind of combine them together. They wouldn't try to kill each other anymore. But for the first long while, you had to keep them separate and feed them mealworms and be dressed in this giant smock that you felt, and you weren't allowed to talk because the sounds they would be imprinted on as well, of course. So it was like a lot of being alone, dealing with birds, and dressed up like some kind of weird monk, not being able to speak ever. It was a funny, interesting time, very meditative. And we would all walk together, and as we walked, the grasshoppers would jump out of the way. And these things had the long, sharp beaks, and they would just snag these grasshoppers right out of the air all the time. And it was always like impressive to me of how crazy precise they were with their beaks. Like sometimes it would freak me out because a grasshopper would jump on your smock because you have a mesh, like a hat like this with a mesh that covers your face, and a grasshopper would jump on there, and they would just be and take it right off, and you'd be like, oh, okay, don't lean forwards when grasshoppers on face, get a beak in the eye. The adage of the crane and the tiger fighting actually isn't. I always thought a crane versus a tiger. Well, a tiger would just eat it, but the crane would just like one of the first things they do when they're threatened is poke out the eyes of their aggressors, which would really disable a tiger. So I could see it. I could see a crane actually defeating a tiger in reality. So I didn't ever expect that would be the case until I spent time with them and saw how powerful they were. There's another reason why you really don't want to imprint them onto people, because we had a set, Edna and Fraser, I think. I can't remember their names, but they had too much exposure. We were doing it here, and somebody walked down there unbeknownst. Neighbors came by, like, oh, what's going on in there? And so they would go and they would look at these things that we didn't really know until we figured it out. But they got, even though we raised them with the kind of protocols that we had for not and interfering with their thinking they're cranes, we didn't really have a tight enough seal on that, and too many people showed up in their reality, and they became more accustomed to people. So these guys, these two, they were like a couple almost. They're male and female, and they hung out together all the time. And they would fly around here, and they would hang out with us. But they showed up in, I think it was Peterborough or Lindsay, and they actually walked right into a bar. And everyone was like, "Wow, this is so cool!" and "Oh, it's so amazing." And yeah, it is, until one of them's threatened or something happens, and then somebody gets their eye poked out. But that never happened, luckily. It happened with a crow I had once, because I had a rescue crow once from a friend who had to clear out a nest in they call it a subway system, and he gave me one of the crow babies to take care of until it was releasable. But yeah, it wound up pecking somebody's eye at one point because it was taken out at. My dad took it out at a party, and he, like when I take it out, I'm very mindful with him because he was, he had aggressive tendencies. If it was a newcomer, he didn't like to be, second on the list. So if you're a newcomer, you had to learn your place. But anyways, Dad took him out of party to do party tricks, and it pecked some poor lady in the eye, and they had to go to the hospital. I wasn't even there at the time, so yeah, always watch out for beaks. Know your bird. Funny, my friend who lived with me had a beautiful parrot, and I was like, oh, wow, she's so gorgeous. And I'm like, does she bite? She's like, no, she doesn't bite. I'm like, okay. So I reached my hand out. Parrot came and bit me right away. I'm like, ah. I'm like, I thought you said she didn't bite. She goes, well, she doesn't bite me. I'm like, yeah, well, that's different than she doesn't bite. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Well, you've had quite a lot of experiences, Geordie, and you've got a celebration of your mom's 75th year here today to get to. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but these stories are very special because very few people have access to the experiences that you've had, which is part of the reason that I asked you to have this conversation and to share some of those experiences. Because last year I did narrate your dad's book, Father Goose. And so anyone that wanted to actually hear Father Goose narrated can get the copy on Audible. And the proceeds for it actually go toward a Bill Lishman Memorial Project. And Geordie, if you want to speak into that memorial project and your role in bringing it together once the donations complete the process, you want to tell people about that?
Sure. So, yeah, we're trying to put a memorial sculpture together for Dad for Port Perry. We have a design. We've gone through a few different designs, but we have a design. We have a committee of people who have been raising money